Another entry. Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Vermont House Committee on Commerce and Economic Development. It is April 30th, 2025 at 2:14 in the afternoon. So now we are turning our attention to S69. There's a new draft that Rick will walk us through. Rick, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Rick Stagel, Office of Legislative Counsel. So this is draft 1.3 of S69. I'm going to share it on my screen here. So it's a strike all, but there has not been a huge amount of changes. I'm going to go over what we've added and also what we removed. I can't highlight what's gone. So what I'll do is I'll note that on the Senate version that's passed by the Senate, this language existed. And you are welcome to pull up the as passed by the Senate if you like S69. But I will note whenever there's been a change from this amendment to the Senate passed version. Do I need any further? I did a walkthrough a few weeks ago. Should I start from scratch or just with the proposed changes?
I think, why don't we just look at the proposed changes?
Sure. So page 2, we have a new definition. And it's the definition of age range, which means either an interval with an upper and lower age limit or a label indicating age above or below a specific age. This definition comes in later in the bill, talking about how companies can determine their age of their users. And this bill allows companies to create these age ranges. You have an age between 2 and 17, 3, and whatever the age range is. It's a kind of a common sense definition, but better to define it than maybe not have it clearly explained. Okay, the next change is removing a definition. In the as passed by, we define consumer health data. Because we're removing sensitive data and other parts that relate back to consumer health data, we took out the definition of consumer health data. Okay, and when we get to that point where we did have it, I'll note that. The next change is on page 6. And that was the deletion of the definition of neural data. Also, yes.
Took our controller too.
That's it. Yes, we did. Sorry, I missed that one. Controller was defined in the as passed by the Senate. We removed the definition of controller in this version. Now, I may one of the witnesses speak to the reason why that was removed, the word controller. Do you have any witnesses today?
Oh, no, we don't.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's all related to the publicly available that we'll talk about. You'll explain later.
So neural data on page 6. Neural data was again in the sensitive data definition, which was also removed. So we removed the definition of neural data. Minor on the new version, the amended version. The new definition is an individual under the age of 18. The Senate version had and is a resident of the state. That's kind of another requirement on a covered business to determine not only is it a minor, but also are they a resident of the state. So that's more data they have to collect. So thought it might be easier just to say a minor is anybody under the age of 18. But a covered minor still has to be someone who is a resident of the state. I'll get to that. We removed the definition of precise geolocation data because, again, that was a sensitive data term that we no longer needed. So we took out that definition. For the definition of personal data, we had a match up with our data privacy definition. So we added the phrase personal data means any information, including derived data and unique identifiers that is linked or reasonably linkable alone or in combination with other information and then et cetera. So we added that phrase in the middle to match up with our data privacy definition of this same term. Follow me so far? Okay. Then we go to processor. So the previous definition was just a processor means a person who processes personal data on behalf of a covered business. The updated definition has a few other potential meanings. So not just a covered business, it could be another processor, or it could be a federal, state, tribal, or local entity. I think this was to ensure we're not missing any processors are liable, right, under this bill. So it's important that you get the right type of entity included in this definition. So we want to make sure that not just that they are a process for a covered business, but they may do processing for another processor or for a governmental entity. Profiling was updated to match the data privacy definition, just including a few words, including, and then adding or identifying characteristics to the definition of profiling. Publicly available information on page 8. We added the or to the general public from widely distributed media as a type of information that might be deemed publicly available. We added a covered business to one of the definitions of publicly available information that has a reasonable basis to believe that the consumer has lawfully made available to the general public. The previous word was controller, so we replaced controller with covered business. On the what it does not include, we removed, it was VI, that was the previous one that we removed. Any inference made exclusively from multiple independent sources of public available information that reveals sensitive data with respect to consumer. Again, because we are deleting sensitive data, we took out this reference to what it does not include, meaning the sensitive data piece. So that was taken out. Okay, reasonably likely to be accessed, the next definition. We took out C, which was previously, let me go back to the start of the definition. It means an online service, product, or feature that is reasonably likely to be accessed by a covered minor based on any of the following indicators, and you see the different types of indicators. So in the Senate version, it included the online product, service, or feature contains advertisements marketed to minors. The reason to remove that was the court case in California that put the law on hold. The court indicated that that might be too broad of a category. That if you just market ads to minors, it could be a lot of companies that do that. They don't necessarily make products targeted to minors. They may have an ad that it has and one ad targeted to minors. So that was removed as a reasonably likely to be accessed definition. Sensitive data was removed from the definitions, the entire definition of sensitive data. And on social media platform, under the what it does not include, or what it does not mean, we remove the primarily consist of news, sports, entertainment, interactive video games, electronic commerce, or content that is pre-selected by the provider for which interactive functionality is incidental to, directly related to, or dependent on the provision of such content. And again, that was seen as a fairly broad exception to social media. And it was just agreed that that should maybe be taken out as far as what are we not including as social media. So again, that's news, sports, entertainment, interactive video games, electronic commerce, or content that is pre-selected by the provider, for which any interactive functionality is incidental to, directly related to, or dependent on the provision of such content.
You took that from what social media platform is
It's
or
not.
is not.
It's not. Yes, it's not. Questions about the definitions? These are where most of the changes were made in the definitions, mostly removing definitions.
We have someone come in to explain, why these changes were made? Or are we, if you look across the table?
Yeah, I can do most of that.
I can do that. No,
Yeah, we can do that. We
when-
can do that.
After we've
Yeah.
gone through this, then, anybody can explain
Yeah,
changes.
yeah, I don't.
Yeah, some of them are the ones I can explain are the legal reasons, right, to make the law stronger. So I would say 75% of these changes were made to sustain a court action. Based on what we've seen so far in court rulings, the idea is you want to narrow the scope and not regulate as gently as you can while still regulating. Okay, the exclusions, 2449B on page 11, we are removing an exception exclusion. It was 6 on the Senate version. So what's been removed is a person who controlled or processed the personal data of not more than 25,000 consumers in the previous calendar year, excluding personal data controlled and processed solely for the purpose of completing a payment transaction, or 50,000 consumers in the previous calendar year, excluding personal data controlled or processed solely for the purpose of completing a payment transaction, and had an annual gross revenue of not more than 1 million in the previous calendar year. So that was seen as maybe too targeting. When you have those thresholds put in laws, sometimes courts will see that as you're clearly going after certain companies here. So it's in some ways safer not to have, legally safer, not to have these thresholds that, maybe exclude most companies except for big tech companies, right? Okay, and that is the only, I believe, other exclusion. Oh, we 6 was financial institution or data. We struck or data to match the data privacy definition of what that is. I'll let Monique maybe speak to the implications of that. Okay, moving on to.
What was changed in subdivision?
So subdivision 6,
Now.
the
What, 7?
it was 7, right? So it was a financial institution or data subject to the Title V. That is what I understand, fairly large change as far as what that does and does not exclude, but I'm not
Oh, I see.
the one to
Yeah,
speak
I
to
guess.
that.
Yeah.
Okay. Then we are through most of the changes. Under the minimum duty of care, 2449C, at the bottom of page 12, added the word religion to one of the discriminatory categories. We have race, ethnicity. Religion was left off. I think that was a mistake on my part. Subsection C, we're adding the phrase or discrimination. So, and that is also not a mistake, but you're saying the content of the media viewed by a covered minor shall not establish emotional distress, which is 1, compulsive use, 2, and 3 was left off. So, or discrimination. So we're doing 1, 2, 3, just to make sure that those 3 are covered, that the content does not establish these terms that we just defined. Okay. Yeah, 2449D, the required privacy settings and tools. This one, I think, makes it more clear The yellow highlights, a covered business shall configure all default privacy settings provided to a covered minor through the online service product or feature to the highest level of privacy, including the following default settings. So the version as passed said not displaying the existence of the covered minors. Should I have it here?
Social media account.
Yeah, the covered minor social media account. So that term was not defined in our definitions. So the suggestion was covered minor's account on a social media platform, which is a defined term. You may think that I'm crazy. You may be right, but we have the term defined, so we might as well use it. And I think that was the intent in the first place. Nothing else changed there as far as the terms. The deletion of account, again, the language is basically the same, but we're clarifying social media, covered minor's account on a social media platform, not a covered media social media account, as it was previously written. Transparency 2449E. A covered business shall prominently and clearly provide on their website or mobile app the covered business's privacy information, terms of service. That's all the same. 2, the purpose of each algorithmic recommendation system in use by the covered business. Previously, this was detailed descriptions. And this goes back to the courts, and you're requiring the covered business to speak in ways. So the First Amendment does sometimes come up. And here, when you say detailed descriptions, the thinking process was that's maybe a little bit too onerous to make companies do that, especially when it comes to their algorithmic systems. That could be proprietary information, could be. Yeah. So we changed detailed to the purpose of each system. And 3, we instead of descriptions, we use inputs, which again is a bit more stripped down, and they don't have to be too detailed in what those inputs are. But they do have to say how each input is ABC. These have not changed. Is measured, determined, uses the personal data of covered minors, is weighed relative to the other inputs reported in this subdivision. Okay, going down to page 18, there are no changes in that next section. 2449G, adding language to ensure that the following requirements are just during the process of doing this age assurance. So one of the big things this bill requires is making these covered businesses understand their audience, right? So to do that takes some, they have to look at data, okay? And while they do this thing, while they see who the age of their users are or visitors are, these are the requirements that they must adhere to. One is the same, only collect personal data of a user that is strictly necessary for age assurance. 2, immediately upon determining whether a user is a covered minor, delete any personal data collected of that user for age assurance except the determination of the user's age range. So this was previously except whether the user is or is not determined to be a covered minor. So instead of making that yes or no determination, we're allowing them to come up with a range, whatever that range is, right? 2 to 18, 5 to 10, whatever they come up with. 4, not combine the combine personal data of a user collected for age assurance except the determination of the user's age range. Previously, not combine personal data of a user collected for age assurance with any other personal data. So we rearranged the sentence here, I think, just to make more sense. Nothing new was added. 5, not disclose personal data of a user collected for age assurance to a third party that is not a processor. 6, implement a review process to allow users to appeal their age determination. Rulemaking, one change here. The previous version, it appeared to be this way. Yeah, the AG shall adopt rules on or before July 1st, 2027. That identifies commercially reasonable and technically feasible methods for covered businesses and processors to determine if a user is a covered minor. No changes here. No changes to enforcement. No changes to limitations. Adding religion to the list of characteristics. And then the last change is the effective date. The act is still effective July 1st, 2026, but there are two different rulemakings in this bill. The first one is that age assurance, making sure that the AG provides companies guidance when it comes to conducting age assurance methods. The other rulemaking is, skip over this one. One rulemaking is adopting rules that prohibits data processing and design practices of a covered business that leads to compulsive use or subverting or impairing user autonomy. So the reason why these are separate July 1st, 2025 is so they can begin that rulemaking process. And so if it passes and it gets signed by the governor, so on July 1st, 2026, the rulemaking's already started. And hopefully that process can be completed shortly after that effective date of the law. That's the idea there, is to give them, and the AG's office could start earlier if they wanted to. But this law would make it clear that, hey, we want you to start a little bit earlier than you think you may need to on that process. So that's the changes made since the introduction.
Questions?
Yeah, I mean, I think Rick kind of covered it, but a majority of the changes came from like a large chunk was like the definitions, because once we took out that inference in the publicly available, it made a cascading effect of just taking out definitions we didn't need anymore. I'm happy to go through that in more detail. And then the other piece was really like, as we were kind of at the same time that we were trying to deal with taking this bill up originally, then the California case was like happening. And so it was kind of a scramble of like, what did we just learn from the California case and how do we need to make further adjustments to tighten this up? And so that was pretty much the like majority of the changes fell in those buckets. And then when we were talking about the threshold, I mean, largely, I think it was our committee that it wasn't necessarily a change that was like sparked by anything other than the committee loudly said, why are we exempting? So that, yeah.
Or try to review
It's fine.
yet some of the stuff. Why are we taking out? When you say we remove
Yeah.
passive publicly available?
Yeah.
What does that
Let
mean?
me go to that line. Hold on.
How did
1 second.
normally
Yes.
impact the bill?
Totally. Let me just go to it because it cascades a lot. So part of the, I guess, another like bucket, and this is maybe in partial bucket here, is that there's definitions that we were trying to make sure that we were matching the like data privacy stuff. And one, the definition of publicly available information had some areas where we weren't sure if we would get pushback on them. And one primary one that we didn't really, we can make an assumption that it would receive from pushback when we did in the privacy bill, but it didn't receive pushback in the Senate, was this inference of, so any inference made exclusively from multiple independent sources of publicly available information that reveals sensitive data with respect to a consumer. So that was one that like Montana and Connecticut, as they were making amendments this year for their data privacy bills, they were including that. I was like matching that in 208. And so we were trying to, though the definitions in this AADC, Age Appropriate Design Code, was we were making sure to harmonize the privacy definitions here and the privacy definitions in 208. This was an area where if we had done kind of like testimony on 208, this is an area we would expect we would need to cut, like negotiation wise. And it wasn't caught in the Senate, and it's an area that we think is like should be cut when it comes to content. And because we removed it, we removed sensitive data. Because we removed sensitive data, then we removed neural, and we removed
Precise geolocation.
precise geolocation. We were basically caused like a whole cascading effect of removing things that were no longer needed to be defined. Is that? That's okay. So, okay, hold on. Let me go slower. Okay, so we are,
So,
that's okay.
so what are we trying to do by removing?
We're removing a potential sticking point for court cases and arguments.
So we had excluded or included publicly available data as something to, if it did affect,
We're,
age appropriate, age
yeah,
data, taking it out, sort of enhancing it or limiting.
it is reducing some bloat to maybe
Okay.
tighten it up. Yeah,
I'll study it.
okay, I can go over what it is.
On page 8 of the current draft,
Current draft, okay.
when we're talking about public available information,
Yeah,
and there's on line 5, that reference to widely distributed media. And I'm just curious if that's a generally understood term, or is that a term that's not too vague?
So I've seen it in other bills. It's not just in these data privacy bills. Trying to think of the other bill I recently saw it in. It's it's generally seen as information that has been in the news, has been available to those who are browsing news sources.
So it doesn't necessarily tie to federal, state, or local. I'm just wondering if there's a notion of it can be widely distributed in your local area.
Sure.
Okay, we don't need to see it go viral to be widely distributed.
Right. Yes.
That's good to know.
I can definitely say yes to that. But as far as does local news mean that it's widely distributed? I would say yes, because we're online now and local news is globally available if you have an internet connection, right? So,
But is
but if it's someone's personal blog, that's not widely distributed.
Is it presuming a digital format?
No.
Okay.
No.
yeah.
So I think this probably doesn't matter a ton, but I was just curious.
We can always define it if you think that that would be helpful. That's something.
If people that know this stuff are comfortable, then I don't need to think. Great.
Questions?
It's okay. No. Do the questions.
So, and I don't necessarily want to expose my ignorance in these people's time.
You should. Let's do it.
So, what's the what are we gonna, I spend some time reviewing it. I don't know what time we have.
Process, yeah.
Much time do you need?
But I don't want to hold people.
We got nowhere else to be.
We're not passing this out tomorrow.
Yeah, I'll need it over.
Quick question on page 17. We're on line 17, number 5. We have sending push notifications to a covered miner between midnight and 6 a.m. Is that seems it's wild that a miner could get a notification at 11:50 p.m.
All night long. I mean, yeah.
Okay, so I mean, I'm trying to fall asleep at 9 o'clock, and if it's happening, or 10 o'clock, so I'm wondering, is that something where be happy that? I mean, has there been entertainment of thoughts of how does we come up with that? Because 12 to 6, it seems like nobody would disagree with, but is there room to make that a little earlier in the evening?
Yeah, I mean, I think we actually started earlier and just pushed it back for like
Yeah.
pushback, basically, to avoid pushback.
And so I was wondering if did anything come up with that, or was it sort of anticipating?
Yeah,
Not-
no.
not-
Yeah, non-committed. It was really just like, what is a time? And this actually, piece of this came from a former Facebook engineer who was helping with like, what is actually like reasonable to kind of like implement, stuff like that. But yeah, it's very arbitrary in a certain way of like, could we make it earlier? Should we make it earlier? Maybe, but this is like it's like,
Right.
why should somebody get something after midnight if they're like trying to go to sleep as a 10-year-old? Yeah, or 15-year-old or whatever.
I think it depends very much on the age.
Totally,
If you're-
totally.
If you're 5, you shouldn't be up at midnight. I mean, if you're 16, 15 years old, you're still covered by this, and maybe you do stay up till midnight, especially on a Friday or Saturday night.
Okay, that makes sense. So yeah, I think that seems a reasonable test for reasons you.
Yeah.
So has it been reviewed by the AG, and any feedback from them?
So they have this. We have not received feedback yet. Generally they were supportive of changes, especially to strengthen when it comes to potential lawsuits. Yeah.
Other questions?
Step out, could you go through it again?
When Herb can have a study session.
Private session.
Maybe I'll
On
get the second.
YouTube.
Yeah. These offer. See if there's anyone. In the real world. Bill itself and the changes that were made. Okay. I think this is okay. Tomorrow, we'll take a look at H208. We walk through that in the morning and then the walkthrough of S71. Those are just gonna be walkthroughs. Discuss this in time next week, take some testimony on those. Also been spoke with the Commissioner of Department of Labor this morning. I think we're gonna, next week, we're setting up a morning or afternoon of having a discussion on having a deep dive into into unemployment, how it works, all the schedules. Understanding what triggers what and when they get triggered. And I think continuing to talk more about the trust fund. I think the trust fund's healthy right now, but I think he shares the same thought that I have, that worried about a recession that could wipe out what we have in that trust fund, especially after we just went through COVID. A lot of money in the trust fund at that point. So trust fund is healthy right now. We get into a recession like we did in 2008 or worse, then that could complicate things for the trust fund, and there may be, and I think it's good for us to have the discussions on, what can we do during that time period that we may have to pull some levers to shore up the trust fund. Nobody on the business side and nobody on the labor side really enjoys those discussions, but they really enjoy it less when we pull the triggers, but there are times where we have to make sure that the fund stays healthy. So we'll have those discussions next week. Also looking at possibility of taking a ride down to Randolph from Wednesday morning and seeing what was formerly GW Plastics. It's now Avalto GW.
Naval.
In the
There's no
Naval.
T in there. It's Royal.
What did I say?
Randolph.
Oh,
They are
Royal.
different. They are different.
Yeah, they are. We may go to, we'll see how long, if we can get in there. That's been a suggestion from the Agency of Commerce, from DED. So we'll see if they can put it together. Depends on how much time we're there. We need to be back for 1 o'clock, so we have time. We might go over to Bethel as well. We'll look at another business that's there. So we'll see what happens with that. So we're working on different things for next week. So any questions? Think about, next week is cabaret, so. Everybody's thinking about maybe talking with Kirk and putting together something for cabaret.
I go.
So, I think we can go offline.